survey of best practices and challenges. You know, AppSec and Unisphere have been doing these on a quarterly basis. In the past, we've gone to specific DBMS user groups and gotten kind of a one vendor view or a one vendor client view of what their key issues were. This time we went out to a broader audience that was more agnostic, and we're going to present those results to you today. So on the webinar, we have the lead analyst from Unisphere Research who conducted this survey, Joe McKendrick. I'm here as well. I'm Tom Van Horn. I'm the VP of Marketing at Application Security. And also with us is Greg Tompkins, who's the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Application Security. Joe's going to lead us through the results, and then I'll jump in where I think I can add a little value. And then Greg's going to talk to you about some of the best practices and product solutions that are available to address some of the concerns that were highlighted in the survey. Before we get started, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Let you know how you can participate in today's event. When you look at your screen, you're going to see a shot of the control panel. This is the master control for the webinar. If you want to minimize your control panel, just click that orange arrow that you now see highlighted. You'll see another box highlighted there. This is the audio pane, which provides audio information. You've got the flexibility to either join the webinar via microphone and speakers on your PC or via telephone, and make sure you select the right one there. At the end of the presentation, we'll do a Q&A session. We'll try to answer as many questions from the audience as possible. But at any point during the webinar, if you have a question, just feel free to type it into this box and then click send. And you know, at the end, and we'll see them, and at the end we will answer as many as possible. And then finally, the raise your hand feature. During the presentation, you may ask you to answer a question by raising your hand. Probably not, but if something comes up, we might. This option is located in the Grab tab. And then the last thing I want to mention is that we are recording this. Actually, one of the most common questions we always get is, are you recording this? We are recording the webinar so that you can review it later or share it with a colleague. Everyone on the call, actually everyone who registered, including those who were unable to attend, will receive an email with a link to the recording within usually 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours, but we'll get that out to you. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Joe McKendrick, and Joe is going to take us through the results of his survey. I think there's some interesting stuff here, and I think you'll find it very relevant to what you're doing. Joe, maybe you can start off just by telling us a little bit about your background, and then jump into your presentation.
Sure, Tom. Thanks. I'm independent research analyst. I work with Unisphere Research and have been working with Unisphere Research on their survey program for the past 7-8 years, and we've published close to about 80 surveys, both among the readership of database trends and applications, our prime publication, as well as various user groups that we have relationship with, the Oracle Application User Group, Share, the IBM User Group, and PASS, the SQL Server User Group. So we've done a lot of work in this area, and I'm also a contributing editor to the publication, to the magazine Database Trends and Applications, dbta.com on the web. You can also find my work out over at ZDNet and Forbes as well. Great, and Tom, I want to thank you and AppSec for the opportunity to put together this latest survey on data security, a very important topic, and definitely something that the market needs more information on. Before I get started, one of the things I'd like to do before I jump into one of these presentations is simply go peruse the list of the most recent data breaches that have been publicly disclosed at the privacyrights.org site. They have an a listing, a constantly updated listing of the latest data breaches. They've been keeping track of these since 2005. And if you really want a wake-up call, other than reading our survey and listening to today's webcast, check out the site and its updated timeline on all the latest breaches that have been taking place. And again, the list may go back 7 years, and I could, pull the most egregious examples, to talk about. But you really don't have to look that far. All you have to do is look at the most recent breaches over the past couple of weeks, and you get a picture of how things can really get fouled up. For example, there's the case. This has just been reported. The case of an employee at a software development firm contracted by New York State Gas and Electric. This employee allowed the information systems of more than 1 million New York State Gas and Electric customers to be accessed by an unauthorized party. The report doesn't go into specifics who the unauthorized party was, but information that was exposed was customer social security numbers, even birth dates, and in many cases financial institution account numbers. Also, if you look at the privacyrights.org timeline, another case is that just happened in the past week, or it was reported in the past week, was hackers who obtained the information on police officers and civilian employees of the police department of the Salt Lake City Police Department. Supposedly, the hackers were unhappy with the wording of a proposed anti-graffiti law before the city council, and they went ahead and released the names, phone numbers, usernames, titles, email addresses, and passwords of over 1,000 police officers in Salt Lake City. Also, in this week's report, a security breach at Indiana University, the personal information, I should say, of 650,000 participants in a fundraising appeal they have called the President's Challenge were released to the wild, and these included names, addresses, dates of birth, all kinds of stuff. So that's just some of the most recently reported incidents, just stemming back to the past week, and I could go on and on with the list of reported data breaches, but I'm sure by now you get the picture. Data is leaking everywhere. And there's no question that data security has become a major concern for many enterprises as well, particularly since the Internet opened up for business a couple decades ago. And in recent times, hackers have grown increasingly sophisticated and able to target enterprises with an array of approaches, from outright intrusions to the release of viruses and malicious code that brings down networks, or malicious code that sits stealthily and collects sensitive data and feeds it to hackers elsewhere. And while awareness of these external threats is heightened, even the boardroom is becoming aware of it, as well as discussed in the survey. Enterprises, unfortunately, are still engaging in fairly lax practices regarding the way the data is moved around or within their organizations or out to external business partners. And we're going to be talking today about our survey of 524 enterprises. We surveyed IT data managers. Unisphere Research conducted the survey. Application Security, Inc. Underwrote the survey. We sent emails out to our subscriber list as well as AppSec customers and directed them to our survey and a website. And the survey was conducted in last fall. Now, just a few words about who we had participating. Our largest segment, 24%, you see there, are database administrators, and another 19% are IT executives and managers, and 18% are some kind of capacity involving development or analysis. Next slide, please. When we look at company sizes, we see that we have you'll see that we have respondents from a range of organizations in our recent survey, from small firms with fewer than 100 employees, 17% there, to fairly large organizations with 10,000 or more employees. That's close to a third of our group, 30%. Next slide, please. And a wide range of industry groups is also represented in our survey. We have a lot of government agencies. 16% of our group belong to government. Financial services, you see 15% there, are part of the financial services sector. The education sector is also prominently represented, 8%. And we also have the IT sector itself, IT companies, integrators, systems integrators, consultants, service providers, 13% of our group. Healthcare medical, also 8%, a very sensitive area in terms of data. So we'll move on here. Insecure times, and indeed, anybody who reads the newspaper or the news sites on the internet or reads checks out the privacyrights.org site will know that these are insecure times. Next slide. We see that an overwhelming majority of our respondents agree that the overall risks to data security have increased over the last 3 years. In total, 82% believe the risk picture has risen either significantly or somewhat in the past 3 years. And you see here also that 47% of our group, which is almost half, rate the risk as significant, much more significant than it has been. Note that only 3% take a glasses half full view of the world and say their risk has decreased.
You know, Joe, the interesting thing here is when we did these polls several years ago, the vast majority of people thought they were completely secure, thought the risks were somewhat minimal with the database. And, you know, and then we saw those same people getting hacked. And there was really a false sense of security. So even though this may appear to be, you know, scary and some bad news, I think it's refreshing. The one thing that's happened is people are now aware of the risks that are out there and they're concerned about it. And that's probably the first step in taking the actions necessary to eliminate those risks. So while this may look a little negative, I think it's actually a good thing.
Yeah. Awareness is the first battle you have to fight in order to get where you need to go, and you know, we'll talk about that in the survey as well. Tom, thanks. Next slide, please. Okay, what do our respondents see as increasing their risk? Most, you see here, a large majority, 81%, actually blame the increasing boldness and technical abilities of the outside hackers who unfortunately appear to be getting smarter about what they do. Hackers have grown more sophisticated in developing malicious code that can hide within servers and PCs for extended periods of time. They can evade a lot of the antivirus and bot tracking tools. In addition, phishing attacks have grown more ambitious and targeted. And note here that close to half of our group, 44%, also say that insiders are getting wiser as well. That's not a good omen either. We also see hints that corporate manager isn't being as helpful as they should be in helping to address these threats. 45%, again, close to half of our respondents say they are actually being denied or don't have the budget support and the staffing support they need to really get the job done. Next slide, please.
You know, yeah, you know, speaking of the one that stood out with me is what you just talked about, that 45% that says they need more budget. That's interesting because if you look at the actual IT budget surveys that are out there, they're almost universally showing us that security spending is steady or increasing despite the dire economic conditions that some people are facing. So I think what this is really telling us is that you know, even with the budgets and their marginal growth, it's still not enough to do everything. There's so many aspects to security that you really need to pick and choose. And I think this all comes down to, you know, allocating that budget wisely, you know, and putting it into the technologies and the resources that are going to, you know, take you furthest along that path to securing your data. So I mean, that's what I take from that point.
Yeah, and it's a tough job too. I mean, it's a full-time job. You know, in a lot of cases, you have data managers, IT managers who, you know, security is one part of their job, but they have a lot of other things to worry about too. You know, in companies where you have full-fledged, full-time security teams, there's more capability, but it's unfortunately not the case for many folks out there. Okay, in the next slide, we're going to look at those folks, that small minority of respondents I was talking about, that 3% who say they've seen less risk. They feel that the risk has lessened, and they attribute their good fortune, better fortune, to having more internal rules or procedures that actually deter internal hackers or errors. There's more of a disciplined focus on policies and procedures within their operations. They also credit better tools from vendors. There's a lot of good, robust tools that are now available on the market, and this is significant as well. More than half of this, you know, small but somewhat happier group also credit the education and training of their employees. There's more of an organizational emphasis on addressing security.
Yeah, I mean, looking at this slide, this is all good news. You know, it all begins with awareness and education, and I think it's real clear from this that we've made great strides on that front.
Okay, and next we'll look at the risk and challenges. You know, the ever-present threat of external hackers, of course, is a dominant concern, and you know, we see here it's ranked second, but it's still a majority. 54% of our respondents are concerned about what's going, you know, the hackers on the outside. There's hackers on the other side of the world even who could be invading their systems. However, you see also that human error is reigned as the premier threat. 3 out of 5 of our group say they worry about internal errors that may compromise or expose their data. And if you, again, bringing up privacyrights.org, if you went back to the timeline and looked at the cases of the breaches, the reported breaches, just looking back over the years, you will see that there's many, many breaches that result from very common benign human errors, you know, such as employees accidentally posting customer information on company websites, you know, sheer accidents, or finding printouts of customer lists, you know, perhaps with social security numbers or credit card numbers, finding the printouts lying in a trash dumpster. There's been a lot of cases of that, and again, a lot of it attributable to just sheer human error. The internal threat as well, we see 45% are concerned about internal threats, you know, going beyond just simple errors, but actual malicious threats from the inside, insider abuse or hacks. You know, very much a concern, very much on the minds of our respondents.
The interesting thing there is, you know, 3-4 years ago, the insiders, they were attributing, you know, 75% to insiders. So I don't necessarily think that's good news because the problem still exists. I think it just shows that you know, we've got more external forces that are going after data now, folks like Anonymous and LulzSec and whoever else.
Exactly, exactly. And one of the areas that we see potential vulnerability is the cloud, and we're going to move on to some of our questions on the cloud in the next slide. If we can move on, actually, one more slide, thank you. We look at database deployments in the cloud. While cloud is still a fairly early technology in the scheme of things, we find that close to 1 out of 4 of our respondents now report that they support database environments with private cloud platforms. Public cloud, on the other hand, is a bit slower to catch on in the database world. You see only about 7% total, either 2% with public cloud offerings, purely public cloud offerings, combined with public and private cloud, 5%. So only about 7% have some type of public cloud capability. But private cloud isn't necessarily has its own security issues as well. Especially since we were, as Tom just mentioned, internal hackers is still a pronounced threat. Also, we you don't see it here on the chart, but we compared the results of the largest companies with smaller companies in our survey to see what type of implementations they have, and the larger companies tend to be the private cloud deployers, the folks that are deploying within private clouds, twice as likely as the small companies. However, small companies are more prone to be looking to public cloud adoption, public cloud type data services or databases. So the challenges kind of diverge a bit depending on company size. The next slide. I'm sorry.
And the concern we've heard from people about the public cloud is just the lack of control over security. They can go out there and they can put in place a service level agreement that requires auditing or requires certain levels of security, but the fact of the matter is they have to trust their vendor. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your contract says with them. You're responsible for your customers' data, and you're ultimately going to be that they come after legally or financially if there's a breach. So I think there's still a hesitancy, and we haven't seen a lot of movement toward public cloud solutions. Now, the private cloud, as you said, is a much different story because they do have more control.
Exactly. And many people view data security as a major issue with public cloud deployments, and there's a lot of debate in the industry now. Actually, there's actually a school of thought. Some people are saying that public cloud is actually a little bit safer because they adhere to a lot of the standards, SAS 70 and so forth, to secure data. While in smaller enterprises, at least, it may be security may be more of a haphazard, ad hoc process. Now, when we look at the challenges, and those are just some of there's a lot of challenges with data security. We see here on the chart that close to 2/3 of our respondents, 63%, worry about data security within public cloud settings, and quite a few, actually, close to half, 45%, worry about data security within private cloud settings. Another problem area is compliance and regulations, cited by 39% of our respondents. And I like the way one of our respondents, it was an open-ended survey for comments as well, and one of our respondents said, quote, "Cloud computing is quickly becoming a concern to us because it depends on third-party vendors and the security methods that are out of our control. While private clouds are seen as a more secure way to take advantage of cloud protocols, data needs to be effectively managed against internal vulnerabilities." So there's, again, public cloud is seen as risky and an insecure place to put your data, but private cloud, which is perceived as safer, actually has its own risk and vulnerabilities. Okay, and we're going to move on. Security breaches, what's actually happening out there. Now, the recent barrage of security attacks by outside hackers we've been hearing about in recent months, Anonymous, Lovesec, and that whole gang. That's caused a lot of concern and caused more than half of respondents' organizations to step up data security efforts. In fact, the majority, you see here, 51% report that news of these high-profile attacks has resulted in their ramping up data security either significantly or somewhat in recent months. So there is a bit of a wake-up call taking place as a result of these high-profile attacks going on out there.
I mean, I think that makes sense. 36% that see no change is still a little scary to me. Given the recent history, if it's not impacting the importance of data security, I'm not sure what will, but it's definitely moving in the right direction.
Exactly. And we move on to the next slide. Where's this concern manifest itself? 51% report they're taking additional measures. What are they doing? we find in the largest number of cases, they're stepping up their frequency of auditing. They're auditing for security against their databases more. Another 1/3 of our group, 34%, also report that the security issues have caught the attention, finally, of top management and board members. So it may take severe threats, but in some cases, management is finally getting the message. Now, we move on to the next slide. We asked about actual incidents that may have happened among our respondents' companies. You know, what kind of events have occurred in the past year to their companies. And about a third, about 30%, say that the companies either definitely or may have suffered a confidential data breach, at least one confidential data breach, or it's probable. They're not sure, but wrap these figures together, and you get about 30% who feel that either know or feel that there have been incidents taking place within their company. 15% are absolutely sure of this fact. So it's fairly pervasive at this point.
And I think, if anything, these numbers probably underestimate the reality of the situation. I mean, if we just go through the history of breaches that have been reported, in the majority of instances, they're not discovered until well after the fact. Sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's months. You know, and some of the major breaches from a few years ago, it might have been years. So, despite the steps that people are taking, it's still a very dangerous environment.
Yeah, Tom, there's even cases of malicious code sitting on people's servers for years, right? That have been feeding a hacker somewhere data, and it's been years before some of this stuff is actually uncovered, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, and we also ask our respondents what they feel is the threat going forward. What's the likelihood of a breach within the next 12 months? And while 30% feel that, say that they either suffered or may have suffered some kind of breach in the past year, we see that 39% expect something bad to happen over the coming year. 8% even resign themselves to the fact that some kind of data breach is inevitable. So there's a high degree of concern among our group here, our data managers, that things will get tough over the coming year. We move on to the next slide. Another area where things get kind of interesting, we ask our respondents if they were aware of the actual cost of the data breaches to their businesses. And here you see that, well, you don't see that here, but a vast majority of respondents, 81%, are simply unaware of the cost of their business. That's 81%. Among that 19% that were aware of what the costs are, you see that reported here. More than 1 out of 10 actually say the losses to their businesses were more than $1 million, and another 21% say the cost was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's not necessarily a cheap event, a non-trivial event when a data breach does happen. And again, it's telling that the fact that only 90% of our group were actually able to document the cost. The issue is that executives need monetary figures to release funds or make investments in security, and since it's such an unknown variable for most companies at this time, it's a component that may be missing from many data security discussions.
Yeah, in this slide, I mean, frankly, we're talking about 19% that have an idea on the value. But when I look at that, 42% of those that did respond saying it's less than $10,000, I just don't believe it. If you have a breach, it's going to cost more than $10,000. You don't do much with $10,000. And when you look at the notification that's required and the remediation and credit monitoring and everything else, I just don't believe that that cost number. I think there might still be some rose-colored glasses on this particular question.
And that's right, Tom. And if you expand it a little bit more and look at the ill will among the customer base, the consequences of a major data breach, the breakdown in trust of what you're doing with their data, that probably carries even more cost.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a real tough number to quantify.
Exactly. We'll go ahead to look at some of the organizational concerns. Moving on to the next slide, the greatest impediments to information security. What are the roadblocks that are holding back efforts to address information security? We know our respondents here, the database managers, the IT managers, are well aware of the situation and what the issues are. In some cases, it sounds like management is getting some of the message. However, the majority of our respondents, 58%, say budget constraints are the most formidable issue they face. They just can't get the budget and the staffing. And a bit of a paradox. Tom mentioned that spending for security has been fairly robust even through hard economic times, but it's difficult to get the money out there where it's needed. In addition, we see a sizable percentage of our respondents, 44%, say there simply isn't enough of an understanding of the threats that are out there among their management, among the organization. And note, this is significant as well. There's a substantial number that report a disconnect between IT and the business side. This suggests that businesses just don't get the message that information security is a priority, needs to be a priority, because there are costly consequences to underinvesting. Recall that earlier in the survey, we do see some evidence that the high-profile threats, anonymous and so forth, these attacks, these high-profile attacks, are spurring some glimmer of response from management. But what will it take outside of the shock value to get management to sit up and listen and support information security data, the crown jewels of the organization? What will it take? That's the question. Okay. We also, on the next slide, see we ask for who is responsible for database security, who's taking charge of this. We see that a lot of it falls on the database managers, our respondents. In fact, database managers and dedicated security groups managers appear to share in this responsibility. Here we see 59%, 58% respectively are assigning this responsibility to these groups. In many cases, we saw in the survey that respondents have both groups overseeing some aspect of data security. Of course, this varies by company size. Smaller firms don't have dedicated IT security people or security groups, and they rely mostly on their general IT staff to oversee data security. The largest organizations, not surprisingly, have these dedicated groups that can handle security at this level.
Yeah, and almost every time we go into an enterprise organization, it's a shared role between the security guys and the DBA groups. And it's real important that there's strong communication between those groups, and they understand the needs, the requirements, the issues of the other. One thing I might just throw in here as an aside is about a month ago, we did a webinar that featured security professional, DBAs, and audit professionals, and they all talked about some best practices for those groups working together. So if anyone is interested, that is available on demand, that webinar, at the AppSec website, www.appsecinc.com. We'll post the URL at the end of the thing, but just go into our webinars, click on the on demand, and you can see how with one enterprise organization, how the groups work together to ensure that their database security needs are met.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's teamwork. It takes teamwork, and hopefully the involvement of management, upper management as well. That's the challenge. Here we ask about information security spending, data security spending. And we find for the most part it's held steady, with 7 out of 10 in total reporting that their funding has either increased or remained the same. Another 39% in total had report increasing their spending. And on average, we find that data security represents about 10% of average IT security budgets. So it's overall, see, there's no issue with security spending per se. It's again how it's being allocated, the kind of resources available. Maybe spending is increasing, but maybe in a lot of cases it just isn't enough for what needs to be accomplished. And I'll quote from one of our survey respondents. They made a good point here. Quote, "I think the biggest risk we have are from the lack of funding to the IT department. The knowledge is there, but we have no cash to implement the necessary changes to secure our servers." So IT managers know what's going on. They're aware of the problem, but it takes marshaling some organizational resources to really do what needs to be done. Okay, compliance and controls. Now, there does appear to be a fairly high level of confidence in the protections that are put in place for databases themselves. We see here that 56% of our group report that all or most, at least most of their databases are adequately protected, in total 56%. However, we see that 44% in total either don't feel or are unsure about their protection levels. And it's notable that 33%, that's a full third of the group, either lack or only have minimal levels of protection at this point, and another 10% simply don't know what's going on. Even though these are database managers, IT managers, they simply don't know. They can't answer the question. So that's still a good chunk there, 43%, who have issues with database protection, and that's a significant number. Okay, how about sensitive data? Personally identifiable information or very sensitive data such as Social Security numbers, credit card numbers, and so forth. Things look a little more secure in this department. At least 62%, a total of 62% of our respondents feel that sensitive data protection is either adequate, or all of it is adequate, or most of it is adequate. So that's reassuring on that level. However, looking at the glass half empty, we still see 38% of our respondents who don't feel that there's enough protection for sensitive data, or they simply do not know. And again, that is a large swath of our respondent base who are very concerned or don't feel that extremely sensitive data is not getting its due in terms of security.
One other dynamic that doesn't really come into play here is a lot of organizations aren't even aware of all the databases that exist. There are test databases that remain online, many of them that use production data. There are departmental organizations that put up a database that IT may or may not be aware of. Just speaking from 5 years working for a database vendor and going in and doing database discovery, I can't think of one time when we asked an organization how many databases they did, and then we actually went out and did an active discovery of all the databases that were online and didn't find a significant number of databases that the IT department was unaware of, or that the security or TAs were unaware of. So there are oftentimes systems out there that organizations aren't actively monitoring or aware of. And if you don't know what's out there or where it is, It's pretty hard to protect it.
Wow, yeah, that's a great point, Tom. And if you're an organization with a lot of databases, and there's a lot of databases that people are simply losing track of, as Tom mentioned, there's data on it. And what's now happening due to the various mandates, legal requirements that are out there, the data needs to be stored. Data needs to be stored and accessible for long periods of time. Now, the typical time required to store in many instances is about 7 years. However, majority of our respondents, 54% in total, say they store their data much longer than that, more than 7 years. In fact, you see here that 12% of our group, that's more than 1 out of 10, simply hang on to the data they have forever. The question is, what happens to this data? Where does it go? A lot of it may end up in these databases that kind of fall off the organization's radar, as Tom was talking about. It's being held on to email, customer records, transaction data, you name it. It's not being disposed of anywhere. It's being held somewhere on a database, somewhere in the organization or at an offsite location. So there's definitely going to be issues. There's definitely issues with that as well. Now, we also talked about personally identifiable information data within the enterprise. We mentioned that close to a third of our respondents are worried about the security of their data, and similarly, we find that also close to a third, about 29% in total, say that a substantial portion of their enterprise's data consists of personally identifiable information. That would be Social Security numbers, credit card, national identifier numbers, health information. And when I say 29%, I'm referring to more than a quarter. If you look at the lower, the 26 to 50%, 51% to 99% in all data categories, that adds up to 29%. And that's a significant part of the data that's residing in enterprises. Okay, another challenge, and Tom referenced this as well, is when confidential data leaves a main production environment and is sent to other parts of the enterprise for non-production purposes. They could be the development shops, testing sites, backup sites, off-site, off-the-premises backup sites, partner site that's a partner that performs backup and recovery services. We see that close to 1/3 of our respondents, 31%, admit that they actually send live production data. They actually use live production data that is sent out to non-production environments, and more than 1/3 use simulated data for such non-production purposes, which is a good practice. 39% say they use old or outdated production data, which sounds like a best practice. I can't imagine Social Security numbers ever being considered old data. I mean, that's something that lasts a lifetime. That's also health records is another area. So I'm not sure, Tom, how much of a best practice using old or outdated production data is within a non-production environment.
Yeah, no, you hit it on the head, because if you look at the actual, whether it's live or current or quote outdated production data, you know, you're looking at a pretty significant number there. And you're right, that stuff has a shelf life. Social Security numbers don't change. Credit card numbers have a long lifespan, sometimes 5 years or so. So yeah, you're absolutely, that's an issue.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, I'm sure many people in enterprises, they trust their developers, they trust the people running their backup sites. They're good people, but you know, it's not a best practice to send out this data, ship this data. No matter how much you trust the people you're shipping it out to, there's always things that can go wrong. There's errors that can happen, new people going in and out of various departments or out of the company or operation that runs your backup site. So there's a lot of risk in shipping this data out, even when it stays within the walls of your enterprise. Now we looked at the number of copies of data. This is also an issue that ties in with the availability of production data, and that's another security concern. We find a majority of our respondents, in total, 57%, report having at least two copies at least at a minimum of their production data housed somewhere within their enterprises, and that could include the offsite backup or storage or partner sites or what have you. And we see that at least 1 out of 5 respondents have at least 4 or 5 copies floating around their enterprises. So that's a lot of copies of data that's out there. And you see here that an issue is that the data managers in our survey don't necessarily have control over this data. Are they able to keep tabs on all this data? You know, not really. Only 41% could verify that these additional copies that go outside the production environment are within their direct control. So more than half say the data goes out and you know, they can't really control what happens to it. We looked at auditing and monitoring issues, and you know, many companies regard data security auditing and monitoring as critical best practices, and they are, but they're often only part of the data security story. These practices, when well managed, effectively spot security breaches or incidents after they have occurred, while the knowledge that they could possibly be caught, if hackers have the knowledge that they could possibly be caught, that may steer them away from a particular data site. But auditing and monitoring are not preventive measures. They cannot prevent data security breaches. They only catch the problem after it happens. And
yeah, you're absolutely right. And I mean, you know, a lot of this auditing is necessary for compliance, but compliance doesn't equal security. That said, at a bare minimum, compliance needs to be continuous, and you need to continually be auditing and assessing. And frankly, the only way you're going to do that is to have automated solutions. And I think when more people start to adapt those automated solutions, we'll see a significant change in this, going from, you know, half the people that do it annually to people that do it on a continuous basis.
Exactly, because look how infrequently it takes place. Only about 18% of our groups say it happens at a minimum of once a month. So it's not a very continuous process. It's something that's very sporadic. And if you're only conducting a quarterly audit of your database security and you had a breach happen unbeknownst to you 3 months prior, that's 3 months where data was leaking out. And monitoring production databases for security issues such as unauthorized access or data configuration changes. It is occurring on some levels, but our respondents are pretty well divided as to how well automated these processes are, this monitoring is. About 44% of our group do run automated tools versus 27% that are actually still doing it manually. So there is some progress in this area in terms of automation. However, we still have 13% that they don't even conduct monitoring for data security issues, period. And another 16% of, you know, again, these are data managers, 16% are not even sure if this monitoring is even taking place. So still a pretty substantial number of folks out there who don't really have a good system for monitoring what's going on in their databases, and but some progress with automation as well.
Yeah, I think there's good progress. That 44% number is actually pretty impressive when you consider where we were a few years ago. So we're definitely moving in the right direction. The 27%, I think it's great that people manually monitor. I think the fact that it's on an ad hoc basis and the fact that it's manual isn't the best practice. You know, whenever you're using manual procedures, they're subject to, you know, a lot of effort, a lot of inefficiency, and probably most importantly, human error. So it really is a best practice to automate that stuff and eliminate those risks.
Okay, great. And you know, if you're monitoring and auditing and you find a breach, you know, how long does it take to actually remediate the breach? What's the length of time, you know, once you catch the breach to take care of and fix the problem? And about 12% of our group say they'll take longer than a week to deal with it, to remediate the breach, and a third simply don't know how long it would take. They simply don't have a sense of the length of time. So you may have a breach that occurred that you're not aware of. You finally catch it. You know, maybe it's been going on for 3 months. You finally catch it, and still it may take another week or so until things are patched or adjusted.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe this slide based on what I've seen in the industry. I mean, I believe the 32% that don't know or are unsure. But the thing that gets me here is the length of time to detect and correct the security issue. I mean, we talked earlier about how breaches often go undetected for, you know, for weeks, months, or even years in some cases. So
right.
To detect and correct in less than an hour, or even in 1 to 24 hours, just doesn't seem realistic to me, given the real-world experience that our organization has had.
Yeah, that may be way too optimistic. Okay, we looked at security solutions as well. We find that database activity monitoring solutions are the security technology most likely to be deployed at organizations. You see here 43%. Another 41% employ database configuration, patch management. However, only minority at this point, 26% report they have database vulnerability assessment solutions or encryption solutions, 25%. Encryption, very important when you have production data going out of your production site. The bottom line, however, is that we do now have powerful tools and technology that will go a long way in keeping enterprises secure. Now what is needed is the ability to get the organization to line up behind data security initiatives. Anonymous, LowSec, and all the stories I was talking about from privacyrights.org, they're wake-up calls that may have at least some of management's attention, but there's still plenty of work to do. And there is a lot that you can do, and with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Greg Tompkins for a discussion on how you can prepare your enterprise data sites for the threats that keep coming our way. Greg?
All right. Hey, Joe. Before you head off, Joe's going to stick around for some questions at the end. And as I said, I'm going to hand it over to Greg Tompkins. Greg handles product marketing here at AppSec. And we've heard a lot of issues that are out there. It's nice to see that organizations are making progress, but I think it's pretty clear from the results that we've still got a long way to go. What Greg's going to talk about is some of the best practices, some of the approaches that we advocate customers use to continue to improve that security posture. So I'm going to hand it over to Greg now, and he's going to take you through what we think are some best practices.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our approach. We've talked about the various problems that you've run into, so how do you solve those problems? And the way we view database security is really about database security process control, controlling the processes that most impact the security of your databases. And what we do, what our system fundamentally does is it collects and analyzes data about your database ecosystem, provides you with detailed instructions on how to fix any issues that are found, and then ongoingly monitors what's going on to ensure that you're not falling back out of control. Now, what was interesting is, with all respect to Joe, is that Verizon does their annual data breach report, and one of the things that they reported was that 96% of all the breaches were avoidable through simple controls. So we've identified 5 key security processes that you need to focus on. The first one is to isolate your sensitive databases, which is find all databases on your network and determine which of those are holding sensitive data. Then once you've done that is to be able to go in and examine those databases and determine what vulnerabilities are exposing them and to eliminate them. The third step is to what we call enforce least privileges, is to make sure that all users in your database ecosystem only have the privileges they need to do their job. Now, these 3 process steps are more of the proactive and preventative process steps. And the goal here is to gain control and then maintain control of your database ecosystem. Once you've done that, we have back-end process steps, which is number 1, monitor for deviation. So you gain control of your database ecosystem. You put policies in place to keep control, is to now watch for scenarios where potentially those policies are being violated and to catch them. And then once you've identified any suspicious activities, to be able to respond in real time to make sure that databases are not being exploited. These are the reactive parts of the process control process. And goal here should be, by doing the work up front, those proactive steps, is to minimize what it is you have to monitor and what it is you have to respond to. Now let's talk about each of these in some detail. When it comes to isolating sensitive databases, as Tom mentioned earlier, is over time database ecosystems become populated with unauthorized databases. And these represent a weak point in your ecosystem because many of these databases are not under IT control and therefore may not properly be secured. So what do? Number 1, we have what's called active database discovery. We go out and we find all databases deployed across your network. Now, what's different with us is we can, through active pinging of your network, we find all databases on your network, those that are communicating and those are not. The second thing that we do is we look at all ports, not just default database ports, but all ports on the network. And then the third thing we do is when we think we found a database, is we then communicate in that data to those databases in vendor-specific database protocols. This way we confirm, A, we have found a database, and B, we can tell you what platform it is. Once we've determined all those, the next thing we can do is sensitive data discovery. We can then go through and start to crawl through the various tables in your databases and examine the data to determine if it indeed is holding sensitive data. Again, we do this through a unique approach. Number 1, what we do is we look at the actual metadata of that information. What are the names of the particular columns in the table? So if you see a column that says Social Security number or whatnot, that's usually indicative their sensitive data is sitting there. But of course, best practices would demand that you don't do that. Second thing we do is we'll actually go through and draw upon a robust library and do pattern matching. Does something look like sensitive data? So if you're looking at, for instance, a 9-digit number, that's usually telling you that it could be a Social Security number. And in a lot of solutions, just stop there. They look at pattern matching and say, oh, we found something. The third thing that we do that's unique is we go in and then do more detailed statistical analysis when we think we found sensitive data. So yes, we'll determine we've got a 9-digit number here. So some of the other things we'll do is we'll look through the database and see, is there a consistency in that? Are all entries in that column 9-digit numbers? Now let's say you see a 9-digit number and a 4-digit number, a 2-digit number. That's telling you probably haven't found sensitive data. We'll look through and see, do we see any repetitive data? Are the entries repeating through that column? And the answer is yes. That's usually indicative you haven't found sensitive data. And then another thing that we'll do is we'll try to map the context of that data with other information in the database. So for instance, it's quite often when you see a Social Security number that you might see a date of birth information. You might see first and last name information. And in doing this, what we do is we minimize the amount of false positives in terms of sensitive data discovery, which eliminates you running around chasing your tail unnecessarily. So in doing so, we ensure that only authorized databases populate your enterprise. We ensure that sensitive data is resident only on properly secured databases. And then we help you optimize the effectiveness of your database inventory and your sensitive data movement change control processes. The second step that we talked about is once you've found all the databases in your network, how do you eliminate vulnerabilities? So databases are often populated with weaker default passwords. They may be misconfigured with security features not even turned on. They may not have the latest security patches. And these expose databases to attack. So what we have, number one, is vulnerability management. And what's unique about us is a two-pronged approach. The first one is to do penetration testing. Penetration testing is an outside-in approach where we come in as a non-credentialed user and see if we can penetrate your databases. This is to imitate what a hacker would do, because a hacker coming in will typically come in as a non-credentialed user. Can we get in? Then the second thing we do is security and configuration auditing, which is more of an inside-out approach where we do a much more detailed level of configuration of vulnerability assessment. And in doing so, what we hope is that we help you eliminate all vulnerabilities exposing your database ecosystem. And then we help you continuously track and eliminate any new vulnerabilities. And we ensure that any checks and remediation instructions are aligned with the latest attack vectors, because over time, there are new attack vectors, so we need to make sure we're up to date with those. The third step we talked about is to enforce least privileges. And what happens is over time, users begin to accumulate excessive privileges. This happens through things like promotions and transfers and inheritances, acquisitions and mergers, where user has a change in job, they get a new set of privileges, but organizations typically don't do a good job going back and eliminating the old privileges. And this can create toxic combinations of privileges which allow users to do things that you don't necessarily want them to do. So we offer a rights management solution, and what our rights management solution does is identifies all users, what databases they have access to, and what they can do in those databases. One of the things that we provide is what we call an admin likeness score. So we can identify users who have privileges that are very much like an administrator. And this will allow you to go in to your databases and, number one, ensure that users only have the privileges that they require to do their job, help you continuously track for any improper changes to user privileges, and then help you optimize the effectiveness of your privilege granting policies and procedures. Now, once you've done that, okay, you've gone in and you've cleaned up your database ecosystem. So now what you want to do is monitor for any deviations from those policies and procedures you've set up. Now, a lot of solutions, what they do is they require sending all database activity up to some type of intermediate aggregator. And when you consider all the database activity on your production databases, this is a lot of activity that can quickly flood your network and potentially impact the availability and performance of your business system that are sharing networking resources with those data collectors. So our goal and our approach is to minimize the amount of data that you need to set up, and we do this through user-defined policy. Now, we break activity into three categories. The first one is what we'll call unauthorized activity, and these are all the activities that you've addressed or hopefully addressed, when we talked about, isolating your sensitive database. We talked about eliminating vulnerabilities, and we talked about driving users back to least privileges. The second level of activity we define are what we call the standard database activity. These are standard kinds of database commands that applications make to databases, but don't fundamentally touch your sensitive data. And then the final thing is what we'll call suspicious activity. That's the activity that you really want to maintain and get and gain control of and watch. So as we mentioned before, with vulnerability and rights management, we help you eliminate that unauthorized activity. And then with our approach, what you call precision database activity monitoring, we provide you a powerful policy development engine. It starts off with standard templates. These templates are built around CIS. This is STIG, PCI. You can start on any one of those. And then as you get going, you can now take those templates and come out with custom policies that eliminate that standard database and focus on the suspicious activity that you deem appropriate. And in this way, you're not sending tons of data only out through the network. You're only sending a smaller amount of data that you deem is appropriate to respond to or appropriate to watch. What this does is, number one, we provide a compensating control over suspicious activity, so we can keep an eye on any vulnerabilities that you haven't had a chance to fix yet to make sure they're not being exploited. We can monitor privileged user activity. One thing that happens is, you may find as you're going forward, there are a number of users that require a high level of privileges in order to do their jobs. And many of your compliance requirements demand that you follow their activity to ensure that they're not doing things you don't want them to do. And then finally, there's always new vulnerabilities that are being introduced to databases on a continuous basis that you need to watch. We provide real-time responses to threats to your database and your sensitive data assets. And as we described, by doing precision monitoring, it's a much more scalable solution with no impact on database, networking, and business system performance. The final piece of the process is responding to suspicious activity. So when something happens, how do you quickly respond to that? And again, through the policies that you set up for monitoring, we can also set up policies on how you respond. We call this active response. So for any type of suspicious activity, you can program the system to do a number of things. You can program it to send alerts to IT or other organizations. You can program it to send alerts to, say, your SIM system. So let's say I'm finding some type of suspicious activity on my database. What I want to do is send an alert to the SIM system so I compare that to the application logs of the particular application to do forensic analysis. You can open trouble tickets so that you can track that particular incident. You can set up an instruction to initiate a malware scan on your databases. And then finally, we can actually block behavior. We can define certain levels of behavior to a precise level of granularity that will either terminate that particular database session or lock out that particular user until you can go in and do a more detailed analysis. That is a quick run-through of our product. We want to do that in a quick time. We invite you to come visit our website to get more information on this. We invite you to call our inside sales operations, get more data. And with that, we'll open it up to questions. One of the questions that we do have is this going to be available, on demand? And the answer, yes. If you go to our web, number one, we'll send you an email informing you that the recording is available, and then what we'll do is we'll also make this available on our website.
Tom and Greg, is the survey report itself available, the website?
Yes, this report itself will also be available on the website. Okay, we don't seem to have any, there's one question, is why is rights management not integrated with DB Protect? It's actually integrated with DB Protect. It's available as a separate module. So when we talked about those 5 process steps, one of the things that we look at is we're not forcing you to go and do all those things at once. You can look at these these process steps and choose which makes sense for you to start from. And we have what's called our vulnerability management solution that provides you with the ability to isolate your sensitive databases and identify and eliminate vulnerabilities. Then we have a rights management solution, which does rights management and helps you enforce these privileges. And then we have our precision database activity management solution. So you can start at the place that thinks, that you think is most appropriate, or you can do all 5 of those at one time. Okay, with that, we're out of time. Matter of fact, we've kept you for 10 extra minutes. We appreciate you joining us. We also want to thank Joe McKittrick for joining us and presenting this wonderful information. And we look forward to talking to you on the future.